You are live!
Yay!
Hello and happy Friday, friends and family. We are having an emergency coffee and conversation, which we've never done before. But the world is is it fair for me to say that it's a dumpster fire right now? Is that appropriate?
It has been a dumpster fire in the special needs disabilities community for years, and we have just
Okay.
added more fire to the dumpster.
True. True. I will accept and affirm that reality. My guest this morning is Amy Fields. Like, we've known each other for a very long time. Like 11 years, 12
I think
years,
so.
something
Yeah.
like that. Amy was just the the sweet light of my son Liam's Montessori experience. And he still remembers you as just this little beacon of light in his Montessori experience. And he loves you and he loves your son Marvin. And I just want to put that out in the world that, for all the educators in the world, no matter when you have a kid, you can stay with them forever. And you did. And so, but we have remained connected, and you are just this fierce mama bear advocate uh, in the special needs and disability world. And so when I was talking about the recent overturn of Roe, you piped up and said, wait a minute, there's this whole thing over here that nobody talks about, that nobody is asking about, that nobody is considering. And what has been clear and apparent to me over the last week is that there are so many unintended consequences. Well, intended, unintended consequences to this overturn. So many things that people aren't considering. And so I wanted to come and have this conversation to start that. What is the domino effect of this removal of constitutional rights? And so can you just, tell us a little bit about yourself to start, and, help our audience understand why you were motivated to come here today?
Well, you've already given me such a great introduction. Um, I am not only a parent of two adopted children with disabilities, I'm an adult with disabilities myself. So when we adopted our children, my whole world shifted.
Mm-hmm.
Everything changed. I was not by nature, I was very shy, quiet, didn't want to cause waves, didn't want to rock the boat. Then we adopted my first child and they told me, love him and he will be miraculously fine. My son needed a lot more. He needed love. He did need love and structure, but he needed a lot more. And people weren't willing to support his needs. I
Mm-hmm.
was told time and time again, he's fine. He's a boy. Boys don't talk, normally. They don't talk. They don't do this. They don't do that. And I really had to get pushy. And I just kept getting pushier and pushier. And then we adopted my daughter. And
Mm-hmm.
then my life really shifted because I lost my job. I
Mm-hmm.
was told, you can't work with her anymore. Um, Everything changed. She had massive, massive, massive things going on. We went to the hospital within like the first 3 days of her being in our house. And
I
they were
remember
like,
that.
yeah. And the doctors there told me, you're not a bad person if you just want to leave her and walk away.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, what? Oh, you're not a bad person. You can just leave her. She's going to be a lot. She's going to be, she's going to be more than maybe most people want to handle. People aren't lining up for children like her. Just drop her off here. I was like, she's not a parcel. She's a person, and I was very upset. And one of the doctors came in and saw me really upset over this. And he asked what was going on. And I told him. And he said, excuse me a minute. He closed the door and I heard yelling in the hallway, like seriously yelling. He was taking people down. And he came back in and said, he said, get up, take your daughter home. You're going to be a fantastic advocate for her.
Mm-hmm.
And she came home, and I had to fight for both of these children. It wasn't a, we're just going to give you these services because these children need them. I
Right.
was told over and over again, oh, you can just be on a wait list. You're just lucky, or she's just going to die anyway. What's the point? Why invest in these children?
Mhm.
I had to start fighting harder. My children breathe fire. They
Mhm.
didn't come into this world all soft and cuddly and fluffy and saying, "Oh, sure, I'll just be here and waiting in the corners." They really they really fought for themselves. And people would always say, "You're a great voice for them." And I try to correct people. I'm not my children's voice. I'm their microphone, because people
Mm.
don't always hear them. They see the disability, they don't see the ability. I'm
Mhm.
fortunate. People look at me and they don't see my disabilities. My disabilities are hidden and invisible. So I have the privilege of
Right.
saying, "Hey, I can just meld in and look like everyone else."
Mhm.
My daughter and my son cannot do that. And it got to be a point where I had to stand up and say, "Hey, we have to, really start pushing here." So I just kept pushing and pushing and pushing. When they said my children couldn't do these things, my children did these things.
Mhm.
My daughter fought very
She
hard
did. Mhm.
every single day of her life. My son fights hard every single day of their lives.
Mhm.
My son has really started stepping up in the past couple years and advocating for himself, because he and I don't always see eye to eye on the same things.
Mhm.
He made a poster and a PowerPoint on why he needed a specific service after I said, "I don't really think you need this service. The service doesn't really." He went into the doctor's office with his PowerPoint and poster and advocated for himself. And the doctor looked at me and said, "Hey, I've got nothing here.
Right.
You need to
Oh
give
my
this kid this
gosh.
service."
Right. That's incredible. So
So,
what is it about this particular issue that you have been hearing, in your circles, and that comes up for you, that makes this feel like a next level fight?
it's a hit to the gut. I mean, it just sets back disability rights and everything. It's not like it's easy for people with disabilities to get the services they need in the first
Mhm.
place.
Mhm.
Most of them are begging for services that they can't
Mhm.
receive. Um, it sets back all sorts of rights. It
Mhm.
sets back everything. It sets back a whole bunch of unchained events. My daughter is nonverbal and cannot move. If she was
Mhm.
sexually assaulted, it would be devastating.
Right.
They're also talking about the fact that you can bring sterilization back. That was something brought up in Virginia, sterilizing my child. It has not been brought up here in Minnesota. It was never brought up. They were saying, we can help you access services for her,
Mhm.
and she can help make some choices on her level.
Right.
But it's going to
So
bring back all sorts of things.
when we talk about bodily autonomy,
Mhm.
as it, pertains to this issue of, reproductive rights, it's a broad conversation, but it is particularly specific in the disability community, because so often throughout history people have not had bodily autonomy, and medical and reproductive decisions have been made for people. And, so can you speak to that, to the history of that, to, your thoughts and feelings?
People with disabilities were often sterilized. They have higher chances of being sexually assaulted. One woman went on Minnesota NPR and was trying to get an abortion here, and she was sexually assaulted in the doctor's office and didn't feel like she could say anything.
Jesus.
I know. And, you know, my kids can't necessarily tell me if they've been hurt that way.
Mhm.
It just blows our mind. And there's parents here who have children who are more physically aggressive, who are
Mhm.
terrified they might get pregnant again, and their physically aggressive child might accidentally hurt them.
Mhm. Right. And so, like, these are the things that we don't discuss in polite society, right?
No, no. We
right.
don't talk about the flip side of how hard this is going to be for everyone.
So can you talk a little bit about that aspect of it? I mean, and look, I will admit that these are hard conversations to have, right? Like there's no easy way to introduce the complexity of this discussion, not just about like abortion, but talking about the inner workings and the individual experiences of, not only individuals living with disabilities, but also the experiences of families and caregivers and all of the different factors that have to be considered, a part of this issue.
I mean, from a caregiver parent standpoint, I knew when I adopted my second child that the chances of me keeping my job were next to nil. I
Hmm.
was fortunate. I'm married. My husband has a good job. We could step back and do that. There are many places that do not support families that have children with disabilities. Minnesota is fabulous. We moved here, the children have waivers. I still, when my daughter was here, I can take care of my kids and be
Hmm.
at home and advocate for them because it is a full time job. But
Right.
many states don't recognize that.
Mm-mm.
And we have
Virginia is one of them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They don't understand that at all. They don't understand how hard this is. And most of us would not change our children for the world. We don't want to take them back or make them better. But some of these parents, especially minority parents, don't have the resources. If they have a child with a disability and they don't have transportation,
Hmm.
how are they supposed to handle another pregnancy?
Right.
It's easy to say, don't ever have sex again. It's
Right,
easy
because
to say,
that's realistic. That's just
uh-huh.
this incredibly realistic,
It's easy.
expectation to have.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely realistic. It's easy to say, don't do, don't do. It's easy to tell them don't, but sometimes things happen. I mean, these women are not necessarily wanting to get pregnant again.
Hmm.
And you get all these fluffy stories about these great disability moments and things and amazing things, but they don't show the dark side. They don't show the children eloping, the parents who don't sleep. I mean, I will tell you, when my daughter went on a trach and vent, you don't sleep.
Right.
You go months without sleeping. I mean, having another child at that time would have been catastrophic when my daughter needed that full time care. Adding another child, and my son needed full time care too, it still does. I
Right.
mean, and these parents, they have children who are not aggressive on purpose, but that's their form of communication.
Right.
These children are not being aggressive because they're violent, horrible people. They're being aggressive because that's part of their disability.
Right.
And the parents show up on these pages and they show up with bruises all over their bodies. They show up with bite marks. And nobody wants to see this and talk about it.
Right.
They want to talk about, oh, this kid with Down syndrome was made a homecoming queen or king. They don't
Right.
want to say, my kid beat me up. They
Right.
don't want to say, I've had bruises from my children. They
Hmm.
don't do it because they're mean to me. They do it
Right.
because that's part of their disability.
Hmm.
So these women are panicking. What if I get pregnant again and my child has a meltdown and they start kicking and hurting me? What's going to happen? What's
Hmm.
going to happen to that child?
Right.
Or they don't have the resources to have another child. They are
Right.
tapped out. They're spending everything on gas, therapies, hospitals, medications. There isn't support.
Right. It's I want to go back to what you said about, like parents of children with a disability, caregivers of children with disability don't want to change the child. These conversations is not about fixing them. We love these children as
Mhm,
they are, and their needs are significant and
mhm,
extensive and require, entire systems of care
mhm,
to be able to meet their needs and, integrate into the world that often puts up so many barriers. And, you know, understanding the magnitude of that, right? The magnitude of the need and the deficits within these systems is incredibly important in understanding this situation. I think that having, worked in the field, um, and seeing so many families, hundreds of families over the years who love their children and adore their children and are excited by their children and also exhausted and burnt out and oftentimes, as you said, abused. And the word abuse is probably incorrect because it implies intent, and I don't think that is not the case. But it is incredibly important to understand that, being able to make your own reproductive healthcare choices in that type of a situation, especially if you live in a place that has insufficient resources. But even in a place that has all the best
Yeah.
resources, right? Like you lived in a place where in Minnesota where the resources are exceptional, right? And your children get all the care that they need, and it's still a full-time job for you.
Yes. It is 100% full-time job. Even with the care and wonderful people we have surrounding us, getting help is next to impossible.
Mm-hmm.
It was hard to get nursing when my daughter came home on a trach. It is about impossible to get PCA services. Even with what I'm offering now, it's still not enough.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is just for me to go to the doctor and take care of my needs. It's not like I'm going to sit on the sofa and eat bonbons here.
Right.
I'm going to go to the doctor. I may be going to go to the grocery store by myself, maybe even a cup of coffee.
What?
Yeah, I
No.
know. Heaven forbid, I take a little bit of time. They always say you've got to take care of yourself. That a
Right.
caregiver who doesn't take care of themselves is a burnt out person. We're all burnt out right now
Right.
because there just isn't resources. And I don't think my son is he's a wonderful, fun kid. He's
Mm-hmm.
15. He's great. He likes to
Mm-hmm.
do a lot of things. He's joyful. I can't
Mm-hmm.
find anyone because he's got medical needs that scare most PCAs away.
Mm-hmm.
And he's not medical enough to require nursing, nor does he really want a nurse hovering around him.
Right.
And he
He's
doesn't
15
need
years
it.
old. Right.
Hmm.
Right. So it's that middle
Yeah.
ground where, so many people find themselves.
Hmm.
So, can I ask you personally,
Yeah.
like if there has been a shift or a change in your position on, reproductive rights, or, have you always been pro-choice, or did this change for you because of, your knowledge about this issue?
Um, I think I've always been a closet pro choice person because of the community I grew up in, but I also am adopted myself. And
Mhm.
I found out that I was a product of rape and incest.
Mhm.
So, and that was really hard,
Yeah.
because that wasn't a lot of choices. I feel like there weren't a lot of choices given in that situation.
Right.
And it was 1974. It was
Mhm.
very difficult to have
Mhm.
any choices. And I think my birth mom has suffered a lot because
Mhm.
of everything she's been through. And she still
Sure.
has a lot going on mentally and emotionally because those issues were never addressed and never fixed through her. She's had people in the family reach out and offer unconditional love and support to her. It's a step she has to take for herself to be
Yeah.
healthy.
Sure.
Um, and seeing my children, and being afraid of, choices later on in life that they might make or might happen to them, I really want them to have a choice as well.
Mhm.
And watching a community who has little to no say over their body and of watching the disability rights movement, forced sterilizations, conditions they had to live in, I'm like, people need to have a choice in their care and how they take care of their bodies.
Absolutely. When you are having conversations as an advocate, um, you know, what tools have you learned to sort of have these hard conversations? I we all have people in our circles and our families who, you know, do not agree with our position and who struggle with this. And, you know, how have your advocacy skills helped you to, you know, to face these difficult interactions with people?
People have just gotten so ugly. It's just
Yeah.
gotten ridiculous. I think most people just want to be heard. They want
Mhm.
to have their stance. The people who want to be pro-life, I don't, they want to be heard. They want to, and so I say, why? Why? Why do you feel that way? So do you understand when you're pro-life? I said, how do you feel about gun control? How do you feel about equal access to health care for everyone?
Mhm.
How do you feel about these things? It really causes people to think,
Mhm.
because I say, to me, pro life is more than let's save the baby.
Mhm.
What do you do afterwards to help the baby? What are
Mhm.
you doing to support the family? Okay, you've saved the baby. That's great. The baby's born with massive disabilities.
Mhm.
What do you do with the baby next? Are you going to provide the baby health care? Are you going to make sure that the baby gets support and need? Are you going to provide the parents with education? And then they ask me the same questions, and we listen to each other and we talk. And sometimes we're just not going to agree and be on the same page. I
Mhm.
don't write these people off. I don't say, they have a choice to write me off, whatever.
Right.
But, I don't write them off. I say, you know what? We are not going to agree on this issue. And here's why I don't agree. And I hear what you're saying. I repeat back what they're saying, because then they don't think I'm blowing them off.
Right.
They say, I say, okay, you said XYZ. And I understand, but have you considered? And they ask me the same questions. We have hard conversations. I'm not afraid to have hard conversations.
Did you used to be afraid to have hard conversations?
Oh, yes. I used to be terrified. My husband said he didn't know what happened to me once we adopted the children. I said she was always there. She was just afraid to come out.
So advocating for those kids gave you your voice.
Absolutely.
What what do you think, how do you think your experience of living in a state with so few resources and so little support built you or developed you as an advocate?
I had to fight a lot harder. I had to
Mhm.
find people who were willing to fight hard, who weren't willing to accept that this is okay. I
Mhm.
found a group of very strong women, and I learned
Mm.
from them. I mean, because they were not willing, they paved the trail in Virginia,
Mhm.
and they're still paving the trail.
Yeah.
They fight and they don't care what people think about them at the end of the day, because they are advocating for themselves and their children
Mhm.
and for their children's rights. I think it just makes you stronger in the end. It shouldn't have to be this hard to get
Right, I was
resources.
gonna say, right?
It
Like
shouldn't I
it
shouldn't have
shouldn't.
to grovel for
No.
resources. I shouldn't have had to
No.
grovel in Virginia. I shouldn't have had to, say, I can't take care of my kids without help. Help should have just been offered automatically.
Mhm.
I shouldn't have been told, you should be grateful for this. That's what I
Mm.
heard a lot of in Virginia. You should be grateful. I
Really?
heard, yeah, that was the common theme. That was the theme of service providers. You should be grateful for this. I needed to be grateful that my children got basic services. And finally, one day I looked at one of the doctors and I said, you know what? I'm not grateful and I'm not happy. You keep telling me my daughter's going to die and you don't want to do anything about it. And I should just be happy and go on with my life. I don't want to be happy. I don't want to be
Right.
grateful. You need to fix this.
Right. I wanna fight.
Hmm.
She's fighting. Can we fight at least as hard as she's fighting?
Exactly. They didn't say that in Minnesota. When she
Mm-mm.
was floundering, and we had to make that choice. And we all sat in the room just staring at each other, not knowing what to do. Nurse pipes up in the hospital and said, "She is fighting for her life, and I
That's
am
right.
going to stand with her and fight alongside of her."
And
That's
that's
what
what
I,
pro life that's what it means to be pro life.
yes. And I was like, why couldn't I have heard this years ago?
Right. Right. Yeah. If it's hard, we're just going to
Mhm,
write you off. If
mhm,
it doesn't seem, straightforward, then it's, that has always been was always my experience living in
mhm.
Virginia. That's not to say that there weren't,
Yeah,
a bunch of really wonderful, caregivers and doctors and providers and,
yeah.
people who had, you know, the best of intentions, but also a lot of just sort of like, well, what do you want us to do? Or what, how,
Mhm,
how can we possibly provide, when it's provided in, countless other
mhm,
states and all over the world. And, but
mhm. If
there
I wouldn't
it's
have
just,
Yeah, if I
go
wouldn't
ahead.
have had Noah's children in Virginia to
Mm-hmm.
help fight alongside and advocate for my daughter, we would have been in an entirely different situation.
Right.
We had some very fierce advocates in there who really taught me to step up to the plate as well and not be afraid to tell the doctor, no, we're going to fix this, or
Right.
no, we want to do this.
Mm-hmm. You know, I spent years as part of um, the hearings before the finance committee prior to the General Assembly session, every year in Virginia, where people are invited to speak for, to let the finance committee, the people who are going to make the bills and the laws, um, uh, uh, know that this should be a priority for them, right? That
Mhm,
whatever your issue is, and the disability and mental health communities are always like the primary
mhm,
folks that speak in that arena. And I remember simultaneously, being so inspired and proud and uh just overwhelmed by the amazing, incredible advocates who showed up there every year and, and pled their case. And simultaneously being enraged that they had to,
mhm,
being enraged that that was ever a thing, that a person who spends 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with inadequate services, taking care of their child's very most basic needs without, in many cases without any support and without the ability to even, sit down and have a cup of coffee or take 10 minutes for themselves, take a shower, to, sleep, all of those things, that a person in that situation would have to take time out of their day and come and sit for hours on end and stand up in front of, you know, God and everyone and say, this is my situation and please give me the help that I and my child deserve. It was always so infuriating to me because, like, again, we're talking about reproductive rights,
mhm,
and here we're talking about reproductive rights, and we care about a fetus, we care about, but we know that systems aren't caring about families. They're not caring about the impact. They're not caring about the circumstances within which individual people live and have to make difficult decisions every single day.
and that's the truth. I have to grovel for everything. It is humiliating. I don't want to sit and beg for handouts. None of us do.
Right.
We love our children and our families, and we only want what's best for them.
Right.
I shouldn't have to go in Virginia. I did this all the time. I shouldn't have to beg for mental health services for my son.
Mm-hmm.
I shouldn't have to grovel for for a nurse to show up for my daughter. I shouldn't have to sit there and plead. I don't want everything handed to me. I work really hard for what I do and
Mm-hmm.
my children. I work hard for
Mm-hmm.
that. I'm not asking for handouts. I'm just asking for basic help so I don't drown at the end of the day.
Mhm.
A child is only as healthy as their caregiver, is one of the taglines of one of the groups I'm with. And it's the truth. If I'm falling apart, I can't take care of my children.
Mhm.
I didn't have a lot. I mean, we had sporadic PCA services in Virginia and supports. I didn't have time to go to the doctor for me. I didn't have time for any of this. My children were 24/7, and you just don't have time. People don't show up. You can't get somebody. I mean, at the beginning, it was $9.10 an hour for a PCA in Virginia. You
Right,
tell me
right.
how many people want to show up and work for that?
Mm-mm. No,
Not many people. And they're like, oh, just get some family to do that. My in laws are elderly.
right.
You know what? My daughter terrified them. My father-in-law finally had to plunk her on his lap because he's like, I'm afraid I'm going to break her. I was always
Mhm.
joking. I said, you know what? They gave her to me, and I haven't broken her yet. She's fine. She's a lot hardier than she looks. I
Right.
mean, she was a sweet little kid. Expect them to shoulder that. That's not fair.
Mhm.
I didn't expect that. I wanted them to be grandparents, not caregivers to my children. I
Mhm.
wanted them to enjoy their time. The same with other family. People were uncomfortable with my daughter.
Mhm.
And I understood why. We worked through that.
Mhm.
Say, hey, come watch my kid. So,
Right.
services are ridiculous. Even here, you have to prove in Minnesota that you have to go through a lot of checklists. The services are much better, but you have to basically talk about your worst day all the time,
All the time.
all the
Right.
time. And you can't ever say, well, some days are really, really great because then you might not get that service on the day you really need it.
Right.
So
Right.
once a year, I have to, go through forms and talk to someone about why my child's still worthy of these services, why the need is still present.
What, when you spoke up on the thread that motivated me to invite you here, you talked about how terrified parents are.
Yeah.
You know, can you speak a little bit more to that?
Right now, some of these parents don't want another pregnancy. They're barely hanging on with what they've got. These are 24/7. Pregnancy is the last thing that they're wanting right now. Some of these parents are in states that are going to limit rights. And they have family members saying, oh, just give your baby up for adoption, or we'll take your baby.
Mm-hmm.
But they're like, what happens if my 6 year old starts hitting me and pounding on me?
Mm-hmm.
What happens, if I can't get to the doctor? I can't go to some places because my child has anxiety and that's when their behavior is worse. My child elopes. I cannot get to these appointments.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the fear, or I'm barely scraping by. A lot of families, their husbands are losing their jobs right now. They don't have money for another baby.
Mm-hmm.
And they're trying. They're not purposely intending to get pregnant. Now, these women want to get pregnant, but sometimes things happen and they
Right.
don't know what to do. And there's just this general consensus of fear and just another layer of stress added to the already stressful lives they live.
Mm-hmm. It goes, I mean, I feel like I'm, preaching to the choir. It's such an individual decision. And there are so many factors that go into making it. And so many different people, have to make choices based on the reality of their circumstances, not someone else's, social expectation of them.
And the women who are really panicking, not only about themselves, have daughters who can't speak,
Mm,
daughters who go to schools, daughters who are not fully in their care. They're like, what am I supposed to do? Do I keep her home with me all the time? She
right.
can't tell me if something's happened. What happens to her? What happens to her rights? She can't say no. My daughter
Mm,
couldn't say no. She could have had something happen to her. As much as I was with my daughter, there were times when I wasn't with her.
Mm-hmm.
What happens to our daughters? What happens to them? What happens to the children who can't talk? What happens to our sons? You know, what happens if they're sexually abused? These people already get away with so much with our children. How much more are we going to let them get away with?
It's a reality that I think, you know, again, we just don't talk about it. We don't hear that side of the 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 experience of, living in the world with a disability, right? Or being the caregiver of a person. And to know, I know in so many instances I've heard so many parents say, um, I don't know what will happen to my child when I'm no longer here to care for
Yeah.
them. It's just a constant fear and terror of, the world will not care for them. The world will, take advantage of this child, in many different circumstances, but in particular for children who are not able to speak.
Mhm.
And to have to carry that fear all the time, and the weight of that, and try to create a world for them that is safe. I mean, we think about how much safety is a part of our, like, whole commitment for our children, as parents. Think about wanting to keep them safe.
Yeah. We can't live forever. I joke that
Right.
I'm going to have to, but the reality is I can't live forever.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I wouldn't have known what to have done. I mean, it was tragic when my daughter passed away this December. It was
Mm-hmm.
absolutely tragic.
Yes.
But a part of me, even though I'm so sad, a
Mm-hmm.
part of me was like, I don't have to worry what happens if I go first because I was terrified. My son has a very different disabilities. He will be able to live and function very independently with the proper supports in place, and he's
Mm-hmm.
going to thrive. He thinks he's going to have 16 dogs and a bunch of tattoos, and I'm like, you go for it, man.
Go
That's
for it.
that's that's you.
Do
That's who
you?
he is, and
Mm-hmm.
that's fine. He said, I'm not going to get married and I'm not going to have kids because I don't want something to happen, that somebody might have to take care of a kid like Carrie Lynn. That's his fear too.
Mm.
We inherently, I never projected that fear on him, but he must have heard us talking about it at some point because now he's like, I, I don't want to have
Well,
kids.
he lived in
Mm-hmm.
the home. He
Mm-hmm.
saw.
Mm-hmm.
He,
And he's like, and he was worried too if something would have happened to us. He always told me I would take care of Carrie Lynn if something happened to you guys. And I was like, that's so sweet.
so
He's like,
sweet.
she'd have to watch a lot of television, mom, and watch me play video games and maybe, watch the dogs a little bit, but I'll take care of her.
Right. He'll be there to be the big brother. No,
Exactly. But I
Amy, thank
can't.
you. Thank you for, for that honesty. And,
Mhm,
like, it's unimaginable to
mhm.
say, I'm glad my child didn't outlive me
I mean, it's tragic, and I'm going to grieve for her every single day,
forever.
but I don't
Right.
have to plan where she's going to go.
Mm-hmm.
She's not going to have to. I'm not going to have to worry about her being abused in a home or anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm. It just, it's just so, I don't know. The world is such a disappointing place sometimes, you know.
Exactly.
I I I don't want to have this conversation.
I don't either.
I want people to have what they need across the board, right?
Me
Like, if
too.
if you have a need, you should be able to have it met.
Mhm.
And, you know, that that includes, services for individuals with disabilities,
Mhm.
services for caregivers, access to, reproductive health care
Yes.
should you need, it just it this shouldn't I- I'm I'm so grateful to you for coming here today and for sharing yourself and for being vulnerable and for, shining a light on this. And excuse my language, I am fucking pissed off that we have to be here.
Me too. We shouldn't have to be here. There should be services. People should have rights. It just feels like another layer has been stripped away from the disability community, a layer that
Mhm.
they fought really hard for.
Right.
And there's just something else gone, and they may never see it again.
Hmm. Absolutely. And all of the impacts of that,
Hmm.
right? Like, just we don't imagine. I encourage everyone to read Alito's opinion, his motion or whatever it's called, and all the things that are included in that, and do your research. Look at how the removal of this right is not just about, you know, forcing promiscuous women to make different life choices, right? Like, as far as I'm concerned, be promiscuous, make all, do whatever you got to do because that is your
Mhm.
right. It's your body, it's your life. But this goes so far beyond, whatever the moral uh, conundrum is about pregnancy and,
Mhm.
parenthood and sex.
Exactly. And if you're going to take away those rights, have resources in place.
Right. Right. Let's
Don't
just
leave.
let's build. Well,
Mhm.
don't take away those rights.
Yeah.
That's please don't do that. And let's have
Yeah.
resources in place.
Let's do both. That sounds
Let's
great.
have resources in place so that if a person does get pregnant, you know, unintentionally or by surprise,
Mhm.
their financial resources
Yes.
or the needs of their other children uh, are not the deciding factor in whether or not they go through with a pregnancy, right?
Exactly.
Like, if you want to give birth to
Mhm.
the the child that you're pregnant with, but you don't because you won't be able to eat or you won't be able to care for your child with a disability because they have no resources, like, let's
Mhm.
not live in that world,
Yeah.
right? So it just is incredibly complicated,
Mhm.
and also very simple.
Exactly. And don't assume adoption is just the automatic solution. If it
No,
was, we wouldn't have all these children in foster care.
right. No. Adoption, encouraging people to have children that
Yeah.
they don't want to carry
Mhm.
or give birth to is a form of abuse. Do not force women to, or people with uteruses, to carry and give birth to children they don't want to have. Um, Bodily autonomy at all costs. What you're talking about, removing the rights of people with disabilities. That's a thing that's always happened in our
Yeah.
society. And it's, something that obviously you have advocated for. I have
Mhm.
advocated for, giving these rights, and making sure that people have them.
Yeah.
uh, and at the same time, it seems like in so many cases, people are only concerned with the loss of rights when it affects them directly,
Yep.
right?
Exactly. Exactly. They just, there's so many people just floating around with this. And, I bring up the disability community and they're like, oh, well, they can't make their own choices anyway. So they don't understand
Right.
what's going on. Oh, we understand what's going on. A lot of us
Right.
do. And if they don't, their parents sure as heck do,
Right.
or their
Right.
caregivers. They know what's going on. And we're angry.
Right. So let's just in our last few minutes, you know, I invited you on and I posted that, you were a parent and a caregiver. And, we had a person say, well, when are you going to invite a person with a disability to advocate or to speak about this issue? And, what was your response?
I'm a person with a disability, and I've adopted 2 children with disabilities, and I'm a passionate advocate for our community.
I am a fierce believer in, the phrase nothing about us without us, right?
Yep.
That, was coined within the disability community, the
Mhm.
idea that so often policy is made without a person who is
Mhm.
directly affected sitting at the table. Uh, you know, Advocacy occurs without ever actually asking a person with a disability or a mental health condition or
Mhm.
another, marginalized identity or aspect of identity to be a part of the conversation. The people who have always been in power often assume
Mhm.
they know what people want and need without actually asking or advocating for those individuals to be a part of the conversation.
Mhm.
And so, I want to speak to that. I want to, I want to put this out into the world and say, you know, I'm an imperfect person. Um, but we're always going to try and have an honest conversation here. And I will open this platform to anyone who wants to come here and speak about their own personal experience, because that's what this is. And you have given us a really a snapshot, a 360-degree snapshot of what it is to be a caregiver, what it is to be a person with a disability. And you have also, spoken for Carrie Lynn and other children and individuals in her position who did not have a physical voice and who would not be
Mhm.
able to speak up if something unimaginable happened
Yeah.
to them. Is there anything else that you want to say before we end for the day? Anything else that you feel like people need to be aware of?
I think we've kind of given a pretty broad snapshot of the fact that we're all a dumpster fire over here.
I know.
Just there's a lot going on right now, and there's a lot going on. And I know a lot of some of the disability community gets really upset when parents say, you know, they express concerns or frustration or say they're speaking for their children and they call them martyr parents. And I
Mm-hmm.
see that a lot in the media. It's not meant in a nice way.
Mm-hmm.
And I do want to speak to the fact that most of these parents, having spent time with them and actually talking to them, are not being martyrs. It's
Mm-hmm.
the same as if they would have had atypical children and, they're complaining, oh, my kids are driving me nuts. It's summer vacation. They're driving me crazy.
Right.
Nobody calls a mom a martyr parent for saying her typical children are driving her crazy.
Right.
I think a lot of these caregiver parents get beat up and crucified
Mm.
on a regular basis, and they're just doing their best. And most of us are in a learning process. We learn from our children. I mean, I didn't know everything there was to know, and my children taught me a lot along the way. So a lot of us are still works in progress. So attacking a parent who's already exhausted and at their wits' end and is upset over not the fact that their children aren't perfect and they're not trying to fix them is not helping the
Mm-hmm.
caregiving community.
Right.
I mean, having some gentle conversations, because a lot of these people with disabilities were hurt and were severely mistreated,
Mhm.
and they have a right to their voice as well. But I think everybody being a little kinder to everyone, especially on social media, because all you're seeing is a picture of one moment in a person's time. They don't
Mhm.
know what that person went through that day before they posted. So
Mm. Yep.
I'd love to see a little more compassion brought back.
Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't
Yeah,
that be nice?
that'd be really great.
So, I think that there are, so many issues that we've touched on here today. You know, you you have become an advocate for yourself and for your children. You have also taught your children how to be their own advocates
Yes.
and to speak up and use their voices to the degree that that they are able and comfortable in the world, and you have given them the tools to do that. And so I think that there are some caregivers who take on the identity of, and who silence or don't empower the individuals that they care
Yeah,
for to use their voices and to speak for themselves, because it does give, in some cases, individuals a sense of power and identity, right?
absolutely.
And so we're not advocating for that
No,
in any
absolutely
way,
not.
shape, or form.
No, 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 no.
And the caregiver, parent, and the individual are inextricably linked
Yeah.
because of a system that
Hmm.
does not provide adequate resources,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
People are robbed of their independence and their ability to be separated from their parent
Hmm.
caregiver in many cases, because these resources do not exist.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Some of these children are with their parents all the time. The
Right.
parents don't get a break. The children don't get a break.
Right.
No
Right.
one gets a break, and
Mhm.
everybody loses.
That's right. Absolutely. So, we signed on here today to talk about Roe, and we've talked about it.
Mhm.
And we need to understand that when we start to peel the onion, this is the last thing I'll say. When we start to peel the onion on these issues, we realize that there are so many factors that connect them. And we can't remove one or limit one without creating I said it earlier, without creating a domino effect. We have to
Absolutely.
understand that it's not complicated as far as I'm concerned. Abortion is a medical procedure, and a person and their doctor have the right to make that decision, individually. That's not complicated. When you remove that right, you complicate everything.
Mhm.
And this is just one of many, many issues in this world that are faced by individuals who may make the decision to terminate a pregnancy. And I just want to thank you for your courage and your openness. And, this was probably an imperfect conversation. And I encourage anyone listening to, with kindness and compassion, as Amy said,
Mhm.
share with us
Yeah.
your perspective, your point of view. What did we miss? What did we not touch on? Where did we get it wrong? Let's keep having the conversation. Let's keep
Yeah.
learning from each other.
Keep talking to me. I'm all ears. I'm ready
That's
to
right.
listen and learn.
Absolutely. Amy, thank you so much. I respect you. I like you. I adore you. I think you're amazing. The
You
world is
are
better because
amazing.
you're in it.
Thank you so much.
All right, everybody. We'll be back in a few weeks with another amazing guest who I am not remembering at this moment, but we'll be back on our Saturday morning coffee and conversation in mid-July. Much love. Happy Friday. Shabbat Shalom. And be nice to each other. Mwah.